You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show with Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from around the local area and around the world. We aim to bring Salford to the world and the world to Salford. We're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers, you name it. They've been on the show and they've been very, very kind to sort of share some insights. We've also have a segment featuring some of the world's most influential people in the field of psychology, related fields, who give us an insight into their take on psychology and mental health, amongst other things. Today we have a guest is on the show from the very beginning and have joined us regularly to bring the world to Salford and copy us in with all the different football, and they've been globe trotting recently in different parts of the world and giving people insights into what goes on in different leagues, and it's been really, really fascinating. And our guest, the YouTuber, one of the footballing pioneers of YouTube, one of the YouTube footballing pioneers, I should say, Neve StuntPegg. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Yeah, it's great to be on again. A lot's happened since the last time I was on.
Absolutely, it's been a whirlwind tour. We can't keep up with you. We just you seem to be sort of jet setting everywhere, and it's obviously fascinating. But no doubt it's obviously it's challenging work as well, no doubt. And the idea is to sort of give people insight to different leagues, different football, different styles of football, different perceptions and perspectives, and raise awareness. And I suppose let's begin with the trip to Napoli v Roma. Tell us a bit about that experience.
Yeah, it was really, really nice for me to be able to go back there, this time by myself. And I just sort of took a lot of walks around the city, really nostalgic trip, looking upon previous memories. And I had a really fun time. The people there are it's a really unique city. And they do anything for anyone, and football just means so much. They look forward to every game, every weekend. It's, the most exciting thing, and you could really feel that in the stadium, and it was such an honour to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I suppose, the game itself, Neve, it finished 1-1. I suppose there was a sense of disappointment with Napoli. I mean, title contenders, and the season, at least at the point of pre-recording, we know anything can happen in football. But they were on course to challenge for the league. I mean, how did the game go? What happened during the game against Roma? And our listeners will be familiar with some of the Roma players as well, and the manager, obviously. But give us a bit of an insight into the game itself.
Yeah, I think it was a great advert for Syria. I think a lot of the matches this season that have been broadcast on television for people to watch in England have been really good adverts for Italian football. And this country, we've of course got Man City and Liverpool who are incredible, but apart from that, the competition has been at a standard perhaps lower than it's been in previous years. And in Italy, it's a little bit different. The standard across maybe the top 8, top 10 clubs is at an all-time high, and it's really fun to watch. Tactics and battles and all the matchups on the pitch. You've obviously got Inzaghi and Mourinho's and top managers out there. And this is no different. Mourinho set out the way he wanted to, you expected him to. And there's a lot of great football to watch, and some really talented players who I know a lot of Premier League clubs eyeing up as well. It's a great advert.
Fantastic, yeah. And how do you how's Mourinho received in Roma? What was your perspective in terms of the Roma fans? I mean, obviously, we've heard different things. One thing's for sure, Roma are playing a different brand of football. They look strong. They at this point they in that Europa competition as well, with a good chance to win. You would say. I mean, at least at the point of pre-recording, obviously they haven't played yet. But what's your take on sort of Roma themselves as well, for our listeners who are familiar with some of these sort of players, the English players who play for them, as well as Mourinho?
Yeah, I think they've got a really high ceiling, Roma, because the players that Mourinho's brought in have improved the team massively. Chris Smalling and Tammy Abraham, as part of that spine, have been really good. They've shown promise. You've got the most out of the younger lads there, the Italian players there as well, and they look great. And there's a lot of promise there because, to be honest, they're fixed with games. They've never embarrassed themselves.
Yeah.
He stabilised them a lot. Roma, it's very easy to forget that Roma, before he came, were a little bit all over the place. They were getting some hectic results in Europe and in the league, and all of a sudden they're a lot more stable. You know, in the Roma-Lazio derby, he's been really clever about that. Obviously, they got a 3-0 win in the last one, so he's been really clever and sensible. He's not let Roma get embarrassed this season, and at the same time, they're in a position to get in the Europa League, which I think is about their level right now. But at the same time, if he continues to add to the team like he did in his first window, and the players he's got, you know, contacts with, and the agents he's got contacts with, there's definitely Champions League potential with them, and I think they're just excited to see what he can do, because he's really enjoying himself. I think he loves Italian football, and he's really enjoying the lack of pressure at Roma, and we're starting to see Mourinho at his best again, more and more, and this could be a really nice blend of a club and a manager.
That's really interesting, and let's turn our attention to Napoli momentarily. Two players that have been linked to the Premier League. One has been with Napoli for a long time, a great servant, fantastic footballer, you know, well appreciated in Napoli, Koulibaly. We think Osimhen, he's sort of arrived, he's explosive, a fantastic player, fantastic talent. We've got two players at different stages of their career. Koulibaly, you could say, okay, is he going to win a league with Napoli? And to be fair to him, he's given everything to the club, and he's stayed loyal to the club. But I suppose maybe the Premiership, I mean, what are your thoughts, Koulibaly to the Premiership, Osimhen? What impact do you think that would make in the Premier League? I mean, I think Koulibaly is one of the best players in his position in the world, if not the best. But what's your take on Koulibaly? You've seen him live now on a number of occasions. Osimhen, how would they do in the Premier League, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a few Manchester United supporters, because it's a position that they could really do with signing someone, and they've obviously brought Ten Hag in now, and his style is vertical, tiki-taka, so, you know, they have a centre-back who they want making those vertical runs. It's slightly unique. I know we have centre-backs pushing up to the halfway line in modern football, but this is even beyond that. And something from watching Napoli so much, and you notice with Koulibaly, it's something that's just in his DNA to burst up that pitch. His recovery is brilliant, and his ability on the ball is brilliant. He's a really confident player, and he definitely got better and better the older he's got as a defender as well. He's a fantastic leader, and he matches on paper all the criteria of the exact defender that would need to be in this Manchester United defence for it to work the way Ten Hag wants to play. So it does sort of concern, I suppose, most Napoli fans, the matchup there, and the fact that a lot of clubs are starting to show a lot of interest in him. I think winning AFCON, and, you know, being the leader in that team and one of the players of the competition, it's brought a lot of attention to him. He's had the taste for silverware. Does he want some more? I think there's all sorts of concerns Napoli fans have got, and they'll be hoping that he perhaps stays with Napoli, because he is so important.
Absolutely, and I suppose there's every chance Napoli should make the Champions League, unless a disaster at this point anyway. I mean, United probably not going to make the Champions League. I mean, United's one of the biggest clubs in the world, and obviously it's lucrative for any player. We've plenty of listeners who are United fans, and we huge respect for United, and it's a tremendous club. But would he go to United, do you think? Not in the Champions League? I mean, do United still have the pool that they had before?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because he had an interview with an Italian journalist, and it wasn't that long ago, that he was asked, would you leave Napoli for an Italian club? And he laughed that out of the room. He said, I wouldn't show that disrespect to Napoli. And he then went on himself, he wasn't asked it, he went on himself to say there's only 3 clubs in world football he would leave Napoli for, and that was Manchester City because of Pep, and then Real Madrid and Barcelona. So it would surprise me if he went to Manchester United, because they don't look like they're going to get Champions League football, and the position they're in the league, they're in a transitional phase. And I do think the next wave of footballers, the younger footballers, they would see Manchester United as a club to go to, because they're so massive, and because they could be part of that regeneration. But a player of Koulibaly's age, it could be added stress. He could look at the centre backs like Varane, who is such an esteemed centre back, who is slightly older as well, and he's gone over to United and had nothing but stress and pressure. So there's definitely reasons to stay at Napoli if it was United that was the only team interested.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, I think, for sure. If the team was set and sort of good to go, I mean, you could argue that Koulibaly would get into any team without a shadow of a doubt. He's a phenomenal player, that's for sure. And you know, United are a huge club. We can't forget that, that's for sure. But at the moment, obviously, you know, City is riding high. They're playing some fantastic football, and that remains to be seen. You know, Osimhen, the other player, he hasn't had the greatest luck with injury this year, but there has been glimpses, and you know, certainly he's a player that is rated really highly. Would he want to come to the Premier League? I think one thing's for sure, he could play in any league in the world. He's got pace, he's got power. Just for our listeners who may not be familiar with Osimhen, what would he bring to the Premier League if obviously he decided to come to the Premier League? There's every chance he's going to stay at Napoli. Let's say, hypothetically, he came to the Premier League. What would he bring to the Premier League, do you think, Osimhen?
Yeah, Osimhen he's got real raw talent. I think he's still got a game that could be polished, but he's got such athleticism and such willingness on that pitch. It's something I've noticed in the last 5 minutes of the time that he's on the pitch. He's still absolutely relentlessly pressing and chasing down that football. He's clearly got a real passion and desire to play football that it's just a joy to watch. And I think he'd be a really exciting player as he gets better and better. If he went to the Premier League now, he's not the full product yet, and I think he'd have lots to learn. However, I think his journey, at whatever team it would be, because it would be a top team as well, would be really exciting to watch him get better throughout the season. Because this is a player that I genuinely believe is capable of doing whatever he wants to do in the game.
Absolutely.
You know, he's got such a shot at goal. He's direct. And we're in a modern football now where the number 9 is a little bit of a dying breed.
Good point.
And he is like an incredible number 9.
Yeah.
You know, so he could bring something to the Premier League.
Great point. Exactly. And he's got everything really. I think, you know, he can sort of play off the shoulder. He sort of makes runs. He's also, we've seen him head the ball. You know, score goals, you know, heading the ball, and he's not afraid to take a shot. And I think he's, you know, one of them sort of players as well that just got, you know, there's no substitute for pace and power really for a strike, and I think he's got that in abundance. And like you said, I think he's easy to forget he's still very young, and he's nowhere near his best, and he can be anything. So that's certainly a player to look out for. We turn our attention to Sweden. Really interesting. Our listeners will be familiar with plenty of Swedish players, that's for sure. You know, we've seen many Swedish, Blomqvist and Larsson, Ibrahimovic, a lot of Swedish players over the years, and but you went out there, and it's pretty fascinating. You know, sort of video for anyone sort of listening in. You Google YouTube StuntPegg, and you'll find the video of her reporting from Sweden. But what was the experience like in general? I mean, what's it like in terms of you know, football in Sweden?
Yeah, it's certainly different. I think that I learned a lot about a different culture, a different way to approach games. I think the fact that, you know, they have the flare displays and it's non-stop, and there is actually Swedish law now that bans flares, like in this country, but it's so ingrained in the culture of representing your team that you have these typho and flare displays that they get them in and they find a way, and it's so important to them, and they fill up the stands with them. And from a personal perspective, watching the game, I do think the standard's got a long way to go, but you can actually really see with some of the players over there, like Seb Larsson, who's now the captain at AIK, as it's pronounced, not AIK, as a spoke to some Swedish people.
Yeah, I learn something every day.
Captain. And something that a lot of the supporters told me was that it's always been Swedish players only in a lot of these teams, because the players don't want to travel over to play in the Swedish league, whereas there's now actually a lot more foreign players in the Allsvenskan, and they're making that adjustment over there because the quality of life and the places you can live in Sweden are beautiful, amazing, and if the football gets to a high standard, and they build, because when the Swedish league does get better, there's more chance of teams in there getting into European competition, and that's the big hurdle now for them to get to the next step. But they're building towards it. But hockey has always been more popular than football. But football's getting more and more popular now.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say, and certainly, you know, they have a tradition of teams as well who certainly, you know, in years gone by, been very competitive in European football, that's for sure, and they've certainly produced players on the world stage, which is amazing, really, when you think of the obviously winter sports are huge there, like you said, hockey, and also the population of the country as well. So I think that it's amazing how they do produce some fantastic players. And what would you say the atmosphere is like? How would you compare the atmosphere to say to English football? Obviously, you've got a lot of experience. You've been to a lot of games in the UK. How would you describe the atmosphere comparatively?
I would say something that I feel like with a lot of European cities and countries, it feels like it's more than football. And I know that the passion for football in this country is incredible. I feel it myself. But in that stadium, there is a lot of focus on what happens in the pitch. And I don't know if this is to do with the standard and the value of being in high leagues and stuff and the thrill of that. But it does sometimes feel, and Sweden's a great example of this, in other nations, what's going on the pitch, they want to promote and support the players, but at the same time, what's going on the pitch is just a part of it, and the whole match day experience is what comes in the stands. And it's sending out political statements, it's sending out statements to the other teams. I mean, these were two teams from Stockholm, but Oislars, they actually don't like to be told that they're a Stockholm club. They call themselves a Solna club, which is a district just outside Stockholm. And they've got real passion for that and representing that district. And it means more, I think, to them to represent the place they're representing than it is to just represent the team on the pitch. It means more to represent a wider picture, and you can really feel that with the chants as well in the stadium.
Yeah, and that's really interesting stuff. And in terms of the standard, I know it's hard to gauge after that game, but from what you saw, would they be competitive, do you think, in what would you say the standard would be in terms of what we've got in the UK, in what sort of league? I mean, you've watched different teams in leagues here, obviously big Bolton fan, and you sort of have travelled to the different leagues. Where would they fit in, do you think, in terms of in playing in a league in England?
Yeah, it's really difficult because when the two teams are next to each other and playing, and they're matching each other with fitness, pace and abilities, it's hard to gauge how they do outside of it. I would say that the time they spend on the ball, the amount of, when the second ball's chased down, how quickly they get to them, I would say that they would struggle. They would definitely not be anywhere near the Premier League at all. I don't think clubs, and neither two of them more, the better teams, the high quality teams. And I'd question whether or not some championship teams wouldn't fit right into this Allsvenskan too. So I do think there's still a long way to go, but they've got players with ability and they're players with potential. But we had at Bolton, we actually had a couple of players that in the past have gone over to the Swedish League whilst we've been in League 1 and 2. So I do think that sort of explains everything that you need to know.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting point you've made, and I suppose there's a transparency and ability where you've got, say, Ibrahimovic on one, in like years gone by in the team, who's like a global superstar, one of the best players in the world, certainly in his sort of, in his pomp he was. But then equally, you could have a player like in League 2 playing for him too. So there is a transparency in terms of depth, and I suppose you could also say, in terms of, I know one-off is one thing, but would they survive over the course of a season in a league as tough as, we know the Championship is a tough league in England. It's hard to get out. Some big clubs who can't get out of the Championship. So it's a really interesting take on that. One thing that we sort of didn't bring up, and another sort of place that's sort of steeped in football tradition is Rangers. And what was the atmosphere like, when you went to watch Rangers play and they went through in the Europa?
Oh, it's absolutely infectious, the atmosphere at Rangers. It's so good. It's the closest, I believe, that you can get to European atmosphere outside of England, that different atmosphere, is Rangers and Celtic. And Rangers on a European night, a lot of footballers stress it so much. It's half the battle. And they will go, they played the home leg against Braga and they lost, and I said it before the game. I said if the fans are like they were when they played Red Star Belgrade, then they've not got a problem here because the team's got enough quality. Braga are very similar standard to Red Star, and they've not got anything to worry about because they will score goals with this crowd behind them. The crowd in itself probably sucked two of those goals in. You know, they are absolutely unbelievable. And what I've noticed as well about Rangers as a supporter, and I think this resembles a lot of Scottish supporters, perhaps it's to do with their footballing culture, is they really support and back, but they also won't take anything, they won't take any bad. You know, if those players are slacking, they're not putting it in, they'll pick it up really quickly, and they'll be telling them. And I do think that's important for Rangers now, going forward in the competition. It's only going to get more difficult. Leipzig and then potentially West Ham in the final or Frankfurt. That's a level of quality now that is big. It's the biggest so far in the competition for Rangers. So they're going to need those behind them.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I suppose, you know, another point of consideration, sort of, you know, close at home again, we've seen, you know, English teams in the in the Champions League play at a different level. City, Liverpool, as I said at the time of this recording anyway, they've both recorded wins. We know football can change really quickly. But I suppose the icing in the cake for me, Neve, would be the national team. You know, we've seen European leagues. We've seen obviously when Italy was dominating league football for many years, the national team was, you know, also successful as well. We've seen obviously Spain dominating league football. They had a team that were nationally very successful. Now England's dominating. Can the icing in the cake? I know we've talked about this before, but it's always great to come back to it, and it's interesting to see what the listeners think as well. You know, I'm in my sort of perception is, and I don't know what your perception is, I think that certain fans aren't entirely convinced that England can win the World Cup in Qatar. But I think they've got the players. We've seen in the Champions League, you know, the Fodens of this world, you know, we've seen Liverpool, you know, some fantastic English players. What are your thoughts? Can they do it? Can they, the icing in the cake, the dominance in club football, translate to the national team?
I think the big test is going to be that group stage. I think a lot of people were, perhaps, of all the games the teams we could have in the group stage, the fact that we could potentially have, depending on if they qualify, Scotland against or Wales, and then also the fact that, you know, we've got the USA as well in that group. I think it's positive because it sets the tone. Both those sets of clubs sets of teams will be wanting to play their very, very best game. You know, I remember when the USA drew against England the last time we played them in the World Cup, and you just thought it was a win for them. To get one over on England and would be a big thing for them. And so it adds a lot of fuel to the fire in the games. It means we can't switch off. There's a level that we've got to keep and a mentality that we've got to keep as well, because there's no easy game, and when they're out to get you, it's especially hard. So I think we'll learn a lot from those opening group stage games is to what the team's about, because they've had to deal with a lot of mental blows as well, this group of players. But this is also a collective of players that have to deal with those blows and then go on to win in their clubs. You know? But we've always had that. I think it's hard because it's so easy to forget. You know, it wasn't that long ago that England weren't qualifying for these competitions. They didn't qualify for the European Cup in this century. They've knocked out of group stages. They've lost to Iceland in the Euros. What we've seen under Southgate and the improvement, and we can tell that it was just against this team, it was just against that team. Well, actually, no, because it was just against this team and that mentality that we should beat them, but we actually can't on the pitch, that has prevented us from doing well, you know, in the last 30, 40 years. So I actually do believe there is a change in the way that the games are being approached. Now, it's just whether or not mentally they can get over those final obstacles, but I back this group of players. I think this group of players is more than good enough. They've got to accept that they're favourites, but they've also got to accept that just because of recent success getting high in competitions, it's certainly not given that will happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing important points there. I think with this group of players, they've won things also at at sort of youth level as well. It's worth sort of taking that into consideration, that the Australians are winning tournaments. Some of these players have won things at national level. At international level, I should say, youth level for their clubs. They've played in the big nights, and I think for me, absolutely, I fully agree. I think that certain teams, obviously, whether you're playing against an England, who've obviously got a team with many stars, and you know, or you play against, people do raise their game, but I do think that they're at that level where you just got to accept that you are the favourite, and if you play to your level, I mean, realistically, and with all due respect to the USA, they've got some good players, we know that. They're very athletic, that's for sure. You know they're going to give 100%, but how many of the players from the USA would get into the England team, realistically? And I think that's one way of looking at it, really. I mean, you know, I know you don't play on paper, and on the day anything can happen, but you just got to play to your level. That's the key for me. Can England get to that sort of level and maintain that? And that's going to be the big thing sort of going forward. But your thoughts, can they play and peak at the right time? You know, that's I think going to be a big factor where, you know, obviously injuries come into suspensions, but do you think they can maintain a high level of performance week in, week out when the games come thick and fast?
Yeah, I really do. I think they can. They're used to it. I think some of the lads, the England lads at Liverpool or Man City, for example, Liverpool looks like they're going to play 63 out of 63 games at club level. Same with the Man City lads in terms of playing so many games. And they're used to all that. They're used to playing like that. They're under strict and high demand all throughout the calendar. And perhaps the positioning of the World Cup and the timing of it in the year, it's a little bit unique, but it could come to benefit some of these players who are in full flow at the time.
Absolutely.
And not just off the back of what they're learning on some of the great managers that they're under. And they'll be confident and they'll believe in themselves. They'll be in the middle of just after playing, you know, the first lot of Champions League games, and they'll be ready for it. And I think we've got enough players who have now, since the 2018 World Cup, since this Euros, that have gained a lot of experience and gained a lot of maturity as well, and a lot of really good senior pros in that team. So I think they can. I just think it's about the supporters as much as anything to
get behind
back that. And get behind them, because I remember at the Euros, it was so brilliant, and once we got on that winning way in the knockouts, it was fantastic. But I do remember when we drew 0-0 to Scotland and the reaction to that, and it did feel sometimes it was a bit over the top, because, you know, this is a historical match. It's not easy at all. And
there's no easy game in football.
You look at some of the teams around us that were losing games that shouldn't be. Look at France and how they were performing, and I just feel like when all is said and done, it was a largely successful competition, and we've got to get behind that and keep that going.
Absolutely, and there's plenty of teams out there that aren't going to the World Cup, obviously, and you know, like you mentioned, there's no divine right for anyone to sort of, in international football, there's no easy games, that's for sure. There's, you know, on the day, anyone can, you know, within a sort of group of teams, certainly beat anyone, but that's the sort of key, and I think that's where the manager comes into it. Speaking of, you know, great managers, I think that I read a quote somewhere, I think Guardiola had mentioned a quote somewhere about, obviously, well, I'm sure he can put it a lot more elegant than me, but around sort of Real Madrid obviously having a lot of the history and other stuff, but if you know, it's not about playing, that's about playing the team in front of them type thing. And, you know, I'm sure he can, you know, I'm sure there's people who can put that more elegant than me, but what I sort of took out of that and sort of reading that was on social media, I thought, you know what, he's got a point where it's important to play the team. That's the key, you know, play what's in front of you. You know, that's the important factor in football, not sort of get caught up in sort of, you know, the tradition of the club or the team. And I suppose what I'm getting at, do you think these managers like Guardiola, and for me Klopp is one of the, you know, he's whatever, anyone who has any, you know, reservations of the, you know, Klopp, he's proven himself to be one of the you know, the best managers of the modern game. You know, irrespective of who you support, I think he's sort of proven that. That's for sure. What he's done at Liverpool is nothing short of sensational. But do you think these people like Klopp, these managers like Guardiola, have had a big impact on some of the young players in England too?
Yeah, I think so. I think with Pep Guardiola, it was a fantastic interview with Kevin De Bruyne. Of course, he's Belgian, but he was talking about the fact that when he was at Manchester City and he was coming to this team, and Pep said to him, you know, you are top 3 players in the world, and he told him that. And at the time, De Bruyne said, well, in his head he was thinking, he didn't say it out loud, but in his head he was thinking, that's not true, I'm not that level. And he then spent his time at Manchester City and the last couple of years that we've seen desperately wanting to prove Pep right. He didn't want Pep to be wrong in those demands that Pep had, and that sort of perfectionist and that demand of pressure. And what he wants, Pep, he didn't want to let him down there. He wanted to say, well, yeah, you're right, actually, I am, and elevated levels. And I'm sure we'll have similar conversations with the likes of Phil Foden, Raheem Sterling, Walker as well. And look, I mean, Walker's development as a footballer, he really struggled on the ball in his early career when he got that move from Tottenham. But his ability on the ball now, and he'll be told, and he'll have such great expectations of himself. And there's a level that Klopp and Guardiola demand that I really believe will transgress to try and sort of go to the other players, the other England players. And some of the England players that have got that talent and that ability, maybe like Bukayo Saka, who's been in a less stable environment at Arsenal, when they go into that England setup, they've got great people around them, but they'll all bounce off each other. There's a lot of hard-working young players, and some of them have got fantastic mentality thanks to their club managers.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And finally, in anyone sort of listening in, and we have a wide range of listeners listen to the show, sort of want to sort of check the channel out. The YouTube channel is unique. As I said earlier, you're one of the pioneers of footballing YouTube, and you've been pretty much there from the beginning with football. I think the channel brings an experience to the viewer, something different, something unique. It's a great experience. I think it encapsulates so many different sort of flavors and variety of you get a sense of the city, the atmosphere, the build up, the game itself, and I think that's really, really unique and in the way the videos are. And for anyone sort of listening who wants to sort of tune in and see some of that uniqueness, they want to take a trip to Sweden or Napoli or wherever you've sort of been and get a sense of what it's like outside the stadium as well as inside the stadium, and sort of some of the key moments. Where can they go to check that out, Neve?
Yes, YouTube and type in StuntPegg. It's a childhood nickname that I've always stuck by, and on there, as you say, I'll be everywhere, and I'll go to a lot of places that viewers want as well. People will email me or message me and say, you need to go to this game, it's going to be incredible, and I'll go there, and I won't just go there, I'll get in touch with supporters out there to really get the full picture of what it's like out there and try and bring it back home to people.
Fantastic. So yeah, that's fantastic. So great to have you on board. That was Neve, aka StuntPegg, on her YouTube channel. Do check the channel out. It's fascinating, and it brings the audience, the viewer, the football. Even if you're not into football, sport in general, or even if you just want to experience what it's like at different grounds, and it's an experience in itself. And I think that's the most important thing, to bring an experience to the viewer, the listener, even to join in. And StuntPegg on YouTube, I'm sure you'll sort of definitely sort of enjoy a different take on football, as well as a professional outlook on the game, an experience and a journey in itself. And been on this show from the outset, and no doubt will join us again with regular updates on Friday Sports Show, the Friday Sports Show 94.4 FM, with your host Jimmy Petruzzi.